The Monte and Wolf Show is brought to you by eSportsBet at esportsbet.io. Head on over right now to participate in their World's Prediction Series through the end of the year using their proprietary cryptocurrency DJT. Now, to get DJT, go ahead, sign up, head on over to their Discord, message the mods. They'll give you a few thousand. Also, log in every day to get up to 5,000 more. And you can use our referral link, deposit some crypto, and for every $1 of crypto you deposit, you will get 50 DJT, and you can win up to $300,000 by the end of the year if your predictions are good. So head on over right now, predict along with us. This will be the 4th episode of the Monte and Wolf Show. There will be no guests this week. As I said, there's a very limited pool of guests that we can possibly get who won't require Wolf or a different translator to translate for hours and be incredibly boring. So we've got Wolf, just Wolf and me again. And we had a banger match this week between T1 and Gen.G. It really delivered, I feel, on the hype that everybody was feeling going into that match. Really high quality overall. But you know what? We're not going to start by talking about that. Fuck you. You can go to later in the episode if you want to watch it. It'll be timestamped. But we have to build up. You know, there has to be some level of foreplay to. That's why we're the Korean fellatio enthusiasts. We're not the Korean. We're not the Korean straight up sex enthusiasts, right? You have to do the foreplay first. So here is the Korean fellatio to tantalize and tease you as we head into the full blown orgasm that was T1 versus. That was a hell of an intro, if I do say myself. So what do you want to talk about first, Wolf?
Let's talk about DAMWON Kia versus DRX, because that series, a lot of people believe that series was decided by Canyon picking Bel'Veth and it being a very weak pick. I think that Bel'Veth is stronger than people give her credit for, but I think it was the way they played that early game was very poor, and they also just haven't figured out how to win with Bel'Veth yet. Like, I love Canyon scaling jungler picks, and I think he is somewhat uncomfortable in this meta because it's not all about him, and it's very difficult for the game to be all about him. It's a jungle meta where you're just a facilitator for carries in most cases, and it's not a meta unless you're able to get perma prio in all of your lanes, like Gen.G just manages to do every game, where the jungler can just gap the enemy jungler really hard and just crush like that. So Canyon has to play a more measured style, so I think he's trying to figure out how to play scaling junglers like the Bel'Veth, like the Taliyah we'll talk about later on in the show. But I also disagree with a lot of people that Bel'Veth is worthless in the early game, because, yeah, she doesn't do a lot of damage and her attack speed doesn't stack until much later on. And once she gets Krakenslayer, that's when she really becomes a champion. But she still does have a really nice knock-up, and she has really good gap close. So if you have the right setup champions, I think Bel'Veth can be very good. I don't think it should have been prioritized as highly as it was in that draft.
Let's be clear. It was a first pick on blue side. And, like, look, we're going to talk about this, I think, a little bit over the course of this series, because there was some weird shit going on in some of these drafts, such as, why was Gen.G banning Draven against T1 when Gumayushi has 0 games on Draven this split? Why was Canyon prioritizing this Bel'Veth as first pick on blue side unless he knows something about Pyosik? And here's the thing.
Yeah.
I know Pioshik's been playing it in solo queue. Like, I know that. But there's also the scrim rumors, guys. And so what happens is one team will face another team, and then they'll, like, Team A will face Team B, right? And Team A will beat Team B with 1 pick. And then Team B will go tell Team C, holy moly, Team A is playing this pick right now. And then what happens is you see bans that don't make sense that are coming up. And a lot of people say, oh, it's just because of solo queue. It's not because of solo queue, guys. Maybe a little bit, but almost always it's because there have been scrim rumors that have spread around between different teams. And it's not that the teams have played each other necessarily, because they're not playing each other on weeks in which they're competing. So I have a feeling that the Bel'Veth priority was probably a takeaway pick from Pyosik. It was, like, very clearly prioritized that highly for a reason. And probably DAMWON was having some success in scrims. But the other thing, of course, of scrims is that scaling champions tend to scale faster in scrims because they tend to be sloppier a lot of the time. And that's where you get certain issues, such as the Bel'Veth maybe not doing as much as it typically would.
I think a lot of people I think a lot of people also incorrectly identified it as kind of a like BM move. Like Damwon was like, "Oh yeah, like I'm gonna prove to you I'm the better Bel'Veth Kyoshu before you even get to pick it." Like, no, that's not. Damwon Kia is actually in trouble this season in terms of their standings. Like, it's very unlikely they'll not make playoffs. Like, I think they're pretty much gonna make playoffs no matter what. Like, I don't think anybody's worried about that. But their seeding going into playoffs could be in jeopardy, and their ability to get top two and just go straight into semifinals is like, I mean, they're a few losses away from that being probably not a reality, like not even a possibility. So this is a really important match for them. They know that DRX is looking really good right now, and there is definitely no aspect of Canyon being like, I'm just gonna kind of troll this game because we're the better team. Absolutely not. I think you're 100% on the money. I think it's probably a bit of a scrim virus that's been going around. Because this happens in Korea all the time. That's why sometimes you see like a weird hover. You see like a Mundo hover or something like that, and you're like, okay, that was weird, but it's because, somebody was playing Mundo against Seraphine, they saw it in challengers, and they're like, oh, this could be a thing. So you do see these sort of weird bans come through because teams do talk, and everybody talks. Like even in Lol Park when we go to work and we show up and start getting makeup on and stuff, like Korean ass like, yo, I saw this scrim, or like even like someone who works on the production staff, like a camera guy or something, might be like, yo, I heard he's gonna play, X champion today. There's like all this discussion about the writers like writing so much stuff down to give us on paper, like, yo, this could happen. It's and then like 90% of the time it doesn't occur. And sometimes you see weird points of the match as well, like Kindred is on the top tier list, and everyone's like, everyone in chat is like, I don't think so.
And only Piotr's playing it, right? So
yeah.
Yeah,
So yeah,
I agree with you. And Bel'Veth was going to come out at some point or another. Obviously, it's really exciting when it does. Obviously, it's even more exciting when Canyon plays it, given that he has this proclivity towards like hyper carry scaling junglers. It was extremely ineffective in the early game. DRX played a really typical DRX game. And what I mean by that is while DRX is good in this meta, like questions abound as to whether they will actually be good should the meta shift at all, because they have an extremely definitive way of playing the game. And that is, and it's working right now. Give Zeka all of the money, give Kingen none of the money. Kingen is the second lowest economy top laner in the league, except for Dove right now. Kingen only gets what? I think he gets 22% of his team's gold compared to 25%, which is Zeus, obviously. You would expect that, right? But he's not giving any CS after 15 minutes either. He's not fed any gold. Meanwhile, Zeka is actually doing the highest percentage damage of any mid laner in the entire league right now.
And what kind of comps is it? Is it just going to be?
It's very predictable, Wolf.
Yeah, is it going to be? Is it going to be some sort of really strong lane in mid where he's dominating and getting prio? No, it's just Corki.
It's Corki. You know what? It's going to be like, yes, exactly. It's bot lane priority. It's mid lane scaling. It's Kingen being a tank bitch, hopefully drawing an Ornn ban and otherwise blind picking Gnar. I mean, I enjoy this iteration of DRX. Like, I don't want to shit talk them too much. They are doing some interesting things as well. Like they have a pretty good success at first dragon and dragon percentage because they're playing through these really strong bot lanes, like having the Kalista Mumu, obviously threatening, but their style is very, very, very telegraphed. And they get away with it because they're good at operating the style and because they're frankly quite good at late game team fighting with these compositions. So
yeah.
And they can transition their leads well, but they're not particularly versatile.
Yeah, I would agree. I think that DRX are it's a very binary play style where they're like, okay, now is the late game phase, we do the damage. And then in the early game, it's like, now we push the bottom lane. And you might try to dive our Corki, but he's pretty good at surviving. He's survived a lot. Also, Zeka is not like taking cleanse very often, even in the Corki matchups he's played. In this one, he played against the Swain, the Silas, obviously, so didn't necessarily need it. But a lot of Corki players are taking cleanse right now. He's not, so that he can teleport back in. I think a lot of Corki players make the mistake of drafting Corki into a pick that will force cleanse, like the Lissandra, and then are just then forced to never be able to bring packages to team fights
Oh,
ever.
we'll talk about that. That was the T1 versus Gen.G series, game 3 in a nutshell. We'll get there. We'll get there.
Just alluding to it a little bit, you know.
That's right.
Still in
We
the
have to tease.
foreplay.
We have to tease you guys just a little bit. That's a taste of our discussion around Game 3 of that series. But yeah, I think Zeka, like you say with the teleport, they have been good about setting up TPs for the package as well. Like there's a lot of strong team play elements for DRX's play. They all seem to understand their roles and their jobs within the team overall. So it's been good. We also see that they, for what they lack, I will say, in team compositions or play styles, they make up for with kind of on the fly reads and creativity. One of the key aspects of coming out of this series with a win was Pyosik on Poppy completely out jungling Canyon, having some really weird pathing. And then Deft and Barrel basically baiting in Dokdom and Kellen. So they're playing the Lucian Nami lane. And they actually, it looked like, intentionally didn't hit level 2 first so that they could get pushed in and bait Dokdom and Kellen, and then Pyosik runs in from behind because he was counter jungling in the bottom side, and actually just picks up some. I don't think he picked up the kill. He picked up some summoners early, but it was a really big win. And so there's a level of strategy in DRX's play and planning that they really lay some very creative traps for their opponents. And so they may not have the most interesting compositions, but the way they play these compositions moment to moment is quite interesting, in my opinion.
And it does give me hope because they use their composition so intelligently, and they do things that their compositions aren't necessarily good at, or they trick opponents into finding a weak point in their opponent's draft that wasn't supposed to happen, like that Lucian Nami 2v2. And it's stuff like that that gives me hope that if the meta completely shifts away from this going into playoffs or potentially Worlds, which DRX could attend, that they'll be smart enough to kind of adapt and figure it out. Because we've seen so many teams who have this kind of binary playstyle where they're like, all right, scaling mid, 2v2 control, topside boring. We even saw like this for DAMWON for a while. Eventually kind of get figured out when the meta changes, and then you can't dominate the same way. Also, the jungle pool changes that we saw, like really affecting Canyon and MSI last year. Stuff like that could, I think, throw a wrench into how DRX is playing. But like I said, there is hope, I think, because of how intelligently they're drafting right now, and then using these drafts to find advantages in other places, that maybe that this is a long-term DRX that will continue to succeed. Because at this very moment in time, I think they are a more consistent team than DAMWON Kia. And I think this is a conversation we have to have about who is number 3, number 4, number 5 right now in the LCK. Because we call these teams the big 3, and I know you don't like the notion that Gen.G has a Worlds title because they didn't under that name, but
or that ownership or anything at all. So it was just purchased, but you can't do that. You can't purchase that. So I reject their claim. It was unlawfully given, and they have not won Worlds.
the way that we coined this is these are the top 3 teams in the LCK almost always, no matter what, almost in every single season since Gen.G has come in, even after Samsung. So the big 3 teams always dominate. They're always number 1, number 2, number 3. But this season, like the mold is kind of broken because DAMWON is sitting in 5th place at the moment as we are ending the first round robin. Now that may change if DRX loses the series against Gen.G. And we're recording this a day early this time, guys, so we haven't seen the result of that. Because I'm traveling tomorrow, sadly, so won't be able to do it the day after. Just getting that out of the way. But I think there's a real world here where DAMWON Kia finds themselves behind DRX and also potentially Liiv Sandbox if they can't fix some consistency issues that we're seeing with them in their games. And I'm worried about it because this super team that they built with Nuguri coming back in after they tried to make Birdall work, didn't work out. Dokdom and Kellen coming through is, at the time, I think pretty easily the most consistent bot lane. Because remember, guys, at the time when they came in, it was still Teddy Gumayusi fighting and vying for position, and we weren't really sure like what that bottom lane for T1 was going to be. At Worlds, it ended up being Gumayusi, and that was kind of the way things ended. Teddy, of course, leaving the team, went over to Kwangdong Freaks. But at the end of that season, everyone was pretty sure that like Duckdom and Kellum is the best bottom 2v2. DAMWON Kia spent a lot of money to get that duo, and unfortunately, it hasn't worked out for them very well. And Duckdom's positioning has been so up in the air and inconsistent. And basically, every game he plays, he either is a god, as you were expecting as DAMWON, or he's frontlining as Senna and just instantly blows up. So I'm worried about that because Deft and Barrel have been very consistent. And Prince is popping off as an AD carry.
Prince
this is a
great.
really big weak spot for DAMWON Kia.
Well, before we get into DAMWON Kia, let's close this loop on DRX because I know you're concerned about DRX potentially, potentially, or DAMWON potentially not being above DRX in the standings, especially given this result, right? But the thing about it is DRX actually has had they had a pretty soft schedule at the start of the split, and we're coming up on the conclusion of the first round robin right now. Again, we're recording this a day early, so they haven't played Gen.G. They are likely to lose that matchup, one would think. And then next week they play KT and T1, which are both losable matches for them. Like DRX also you would expect to lose to T1, and KT is inconsistent, but on a good day might be able to actually do some damage. So there is a reality that at the halfway point, they could be something like 6-3, 5-4, depending on how things go after the first round robin. And by the end of next week, when they will be in their first game of the second round robin versus T1, they are likely to lose that as well. So I think probably 6-4 would be the expected result if they beat KT, but that's still very doable for DAMWON Kia, especially because their next week is with Kongdu and Fredit Brion, which means don't
call
Kwangdong. Sorry, Kwangdong.
An old habits die hard, but I mean, hey, there's a bit of they haven't been doing so hot, but they're not Kongdu monster level. Okay?
Kwangdong, excuse me, Kwangdong. But there's a reality here where DAMWON Kia by the end of next week is 7-3. So I think that unless DRX is able to pull off some upsets here, we should still see DAMWON ahead in the standings. So I was going to pump the brakes on the DAMWON Kia panic real quick.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, in terms of where we're going in the next week and a half of schedule, it's looking good. Because then DAMWON also has Nongshim as their third opponent, and then they face off against DRX in that rematch. So the rematch is not that far away. It's just 2 weeks away. So that's very exciting for me, and that was something we were talking a lot about on the broadcast, is the way that DRX won it was on thin margins. Like, it wasn't a crushing victory or anything like that. It was just a good performance from them and a little bit of inconsistency again on the bottom duo. And the Belveth game, again, I like the idea. It was pretty high prio, it was pretty face up, didn't work out. But
here's the thing about DAMWON, and we can talk about them right now. I love the fact that they do these things. And look, I think you're right. Duckdom, you either have a godly performance like he had on Lucian in the second game against DRX, or sometimes they're going to have some level of issues, right? But I think they bounced back really well. And in the series against Hanwha, right? Duckdom had an insane Aphelios game there, which is one of his bread and butter champions. But I think this is where we saw, if you don't like the Belveth pick, then you can't like what they did in the Hanwha series, which I thought was really fucking smart. And I think this is really where DAMWON Kia shines to me, because if you're asking about, this is a team that's still struggling with their identity, but their greatest strength, I think, as a roster is in depth of champion pools from Showmaker, Canyon, and Nuguri, right? And I think what this series against Hanwha Life, even though they are an inferior opponent, shows is that yes, they can have some weird picks. Like, Talia is the Canyon pick. He's had it multiple times, but it's very deliberately a Kalista counter pick, which is really interesting because it means they don't have to ban Kalista. They get a counter pick. Canyon, and not only that, but it's the flex pick of this Talia because they flex it into mid lane in game 2.
Yeah,
and they bait out the
pick is so perfect.
Yeah, they bait out the Sejuani in the second round of bans. Hanwha doesn't ban junglers because they think Talia's jungling. And then there's the Trundle pick, right? Instantly into the Sejuani. And as sloppy as game one was for DAMWON Kia into Hanwha Life, and Hanwha nearly wins it because the flaws of DAMWON Kia are still there. They're taking 4v5 fights while Dokdom is running from base instead of just waiting or not taking a fight. Like, they get themselves into stupid situations because their coordination is bad in terms of engagements. If all of them are there, they look incredible. But getting all of them there seems to be a problem. But this is all to say, like, I love the fact that they have all of these flex picks. They have all of these weird pocket picks that are straight up counters. If you look at the first game, Taliyah E hurts everybody. It hurts Viego. It hurts Gnar. It hurts Ahri. It hurts Amumu. It hurts Kalista. It is a fucking great pick. He did an immense amount of damage in this series. And it's not only that, Wolf. It's that they're doing very weird things, such as Canyon's playing First Strike, Futures Market, Treasure Hunter Taliyah.
Yeah.
Which is insane that you would do that. But it snowballs so hard once you start getting advantages.
Especially when you're able to get 4 kills back to back. You get 2 and then 2. And that specific fight that I'm referring to for Canyon, where he gets the second 2, is when they're coming towards Drake. And I mean, I have this so vividly in my memory, and I think I even said on the cast, like, he won't be there in time, but I think he's going to channel ult, and then he channels ult. And I'm watching this on the minimap, and I'm watching his like ult like meter, like he's charging it up, and I'm seeing it, and I'm like, oh, he's actually going to try this. Like, it's moments like this where I think, when I watch Canyon and I see this, I'm like, this son of a bitch crazy enough to do it. Like, he's actually gonna press his R button. Like, he's gonna do it. And then he comes in, and like, they don't get the Drake, but he just barely catches them because Showmaker baits on Lissandra, and then he picks up 2 kills, all those extra treasure hunter stacks. He's got a Dark Seal at this point, I believe. Yeah. And he's just stacking up. Then he goes up to 10 on the Dark Seal. Has Futures Market, so gets an early, gets his item early. His Luden's very, very early. Builds into insane damage and does 40,000 damage in that game because he's just so ahead. It's unbelievable.
He's so ahead.
He got a Magi's and like sold it later on in the game to get full build. Like,
he's so ahead, it's unbelievable. But also, he doesn't start that way, and this is really the brilliance, because you really want to gank bottom in this situation because there's the Kalista Amumu there, and your E has such insane value on that gank, right? And also, if Viego shows up, then you get value out of that as well, which is where he gets the double kill to start things off. But he actually dies early on, so he's not really ahead. But the thing about this build is that even though he was just hard farming for the first few levels, but because his pathing was good, because he has Futures Market, he literally rocks up with like a Lost Chapter and a Dark Seal like 6 minutes into the game. And I was like, what the fuck? Like, his first buy back was Dark Seal double Amp Tome. And I was like, oh my God, you know, with First Strike, if this guy ever hits anybody, he's just going to annihilate them. And then like when you're talking after that second like double kill, he went back, and if I remember correctly, he came back with like Ludens and Sork shoes. It was 13 minutes into the game. It was crazy.
He had them. He had the pen boots, and like, he was just going to go around the map and threaten people nonstop. And like, against Lissandra too, like in fights like that, or with Lissandra rather, you have so much follow up for his engages, but you also have the ability to like Ring of Frost and then follow up with him. He works so well in that duo. And I just really liked the idea of this comp is going to slap if we play it our way, kind of idea. And it almost didn't work. Like, they were a little bit behind, and the tempo was against them, and it felt like, uh-oh, this pick is not necessarily going to work. But they made 2 decisive calls, and then suddenly Canyon is on top of the game. Like,
I mean, they did int they did have substantial leads that they threw, again, because it looks like the communication isn't there. Like, not everybody's on the same page with the play, or they think they can make a play like it's more advanced than they are. Like, it makes it seem like they're more ahead than they are, and they didn't respect the massive amount of CC that Hanwha had and their willingness to just kind of engage on it. But overall, I mean, I think the Taliyah pick was just so good in this particular draft, and Canyon was making so much money off of his rune choices with it that the snowball was absolutely epic. He ends up becoming like a full build, like 6 item Taliyah pretty early into the game by full build standards. So, I mean, to me, this is what you want from DAMWON Kia, right? You want Dokdom and Kellen to be reacting to either Showmaker or Canyon's pressure. Like, their job is to just play the lane however Canyon and Showmaker want to, not play aggressively unless Canyon or Showmaker are there. Because the thing about Nuguri is that he's always pushing, right? He's always pushing. And he's played like this for a long time. And that's great, because if they commit resources to kill him, then you make a counterplay. But you can't be pushing in these other lanes when you make that counterplay. So in a way, Canyon has to make decisions, either counter gank top or play around Showmaker, Dokdom, and Kellen, and just allow Nuguri to just absorb all of that pressure. Because even when Nuguri's behind, he's still really good, right?
Yeah.
So that's what I want to see out of this roster. And I think they just need to make this decision about to play that way, basically.
Yeah, I think so. And I think if they could just shore up some of the inconsistencies with Dokdom, like on his best days, like he has, I think, 4 MVPs he's gotten, like 4 POGs this season. And that puts him like tied with all of the DAMWON players who've gotten them. I just think it's hilarious how he's either player of the game or he lost the game for them. Like there's like no middle ground so far. Especially if you go back to that T1 series, I'm like, wow, you had that one great game and then you were like in taunt range for the Galio as Ezreal. It's just like that dichotomy that I think if they could shore up, that makes all of those things that you just described a lot easier. If he's playing better in 2v2s, if he's positioning better. So fingers crossed that DAMWON can bounce back. But some of the games, as unique and cool as they are, I expect to be cleaner. Like I expected this game for DAMWON with the Taliyah pick for them to just absolutely smash it. If it works out for them, and not be like, okay, barely luckily Canyon got those last 2 kills at the last possible second, and also Hanwha were baited by Showmaker there, and then we still got the money, and we luckily were still able to win the game because the comp does make sense and it is good. But like when we're still like I know you love the comp and I do too, and it was a one-sided game once it became a one-sided game, but until those moments, like Atlas and I are looking at each other like, is Hanwha gonna take a game off of DAMWON Kia? Like after we casted four nights of like 6-game nights, we're like, are we going to another game 3 tonight? Is DAMWON gonna drop the ball here? Like, is this actually going to happen? Those are the kind of games that like DAMWON fans, or not DAMWON fans, but DAMWON haters, I guess I should say, like are coming out of the woodwork when this happens. So they just don't trust that DAMWON's consistency is going to be there. And I have my doubts too. Like I think the intelligence of drafting is there, and Danny has put together some really cool stuff.
These drafts were really good versus Hanwha.
I'm just not ready to trust yet.
The drafts were really good, and the first game should have been very clean, except they decided to fight players down at stupid times, right? Second game was very clean, as we would have expected for them dominating this matchup. But I think you just have to lean into Canyon being the centerpiece of this team, as they always have. It's like, maybe it's hard because last year Dokdom and Kellen were used to being the center of like the Nongshim Red Force roster, and perhaps there's some confusion as to how this is going to play. But for me, you lean into the flex picks, you lean into the versatility. Canyon's played 12 different junglers in 18 games, which is absolutely bonkers in the current meta. And for him to play Taliyah and Kiana and some of these picks are such unique weapons that DAMWON has. And when they are all in a fight, they are all very good together. Like, as long as they're all there, and we saw this later on, the game-winning fight for DAMWON was absolutely beautiful in this Hanwha game once they finally got to the same place on the map. And Showmaker played it incredibly well. But once they're all there, it works out. So I want to see them use these compositions that only they're going to have practice with. They're going to be much better at executing the win conditions on, and just play off of Nuguri's pressure. That's what you have to do. So I think that this new roster is still gelling, and like they kind of get a pass for the first round robin, more or less, because it's a really different team than it was last split. But I think the seeds have been sown. The drafts are good. They have versatility. They have the tools, and it's not that many things need to be changed, I feel, for them to really start rolling.
And I I want to go back to a point I made about DRX, like the being flexible in like when we move into a new patch, new meta, etc. I think that when DAMWON will peak the highest, probably based on what we've seen so far, is when the Worlds patch is decided, and it's like it's going to be like, okay, we have the playoffs patch decided for LCK. Then they end up, we'll see how far they go. Maybe they make the finals again. That would be a cool storyline. But when the Worlds patch is decided, and they very likely attend Worlds based on their points and how strong of a team they are, and like if they have to go through the gauntlet, I trust that they'll probably make it. But again, seems unlikely at this moment in time. But we'll have to wait and see. The teams competing with them in third and fourth don't have so many points. So when we see them in Worlds potentially, that's when like because they haven't committed to one play style and they're very like open-minded, let's say, about the meta and are thinking very proactively about what's strong right now. I think that might be where they really shine because they'll have also had that extra time to gel with Nuguri and Duck Dom and Kellen. So that's my hope is that maybe we'll see DAMWON Key at Worlds and maybe they'll make like top 4 at Worlds and we'll see this roster at its full potential.
Yeah, I mean, it would be really a shame for them not to be at Worlds, right? Like, for us, we definitely want to see DAMWON there. We definitely want to see Gen.G and T1 there. It's just a question of, do we want that fourth team to be Def's last hurrah as a pro player, or do we want it to be Liiv Sandbox because they're fucking hilarious?
Yeah, that's like the conversation I had with Atlas yesterday.
It's like, for the lulls,
Well, it's a new generation, like a completely new generation of players if Liiv Sandbox go. And that's what's really, for me, like that's why it's so tragic, because I think that's more important than Deft, who's already had like a million chances and opportunities, right? Like to me, and I love Deft as a player, and I'm very sad that he's retiring, and I want both him and Liiv Sandbox to be there. But DRX roster is a roster of players that have, most of them, been to Worlds and have like had international experience and chances and stuff like that. I'd love to see Liiv Sandbox be like a new generation of Korean players. Going back to the conversation we had last week with Arnold of like, I want new players in the LCK. I want new superstars. I want new players that people know internationally. Because right now, if you ask the average League of Legends fan, like, have you heard of Prince? They'll say no. I heard that some guy who was on Liiv Sandbox before because I watched him in LCS. But that's where I heard about Liiv Sandbox. I saw him in LCS, but I want people to be like, no. I don't watch LCK that much, but I heard this Prince guy is really good. I heard Croco is sick.
Croco is sick. Maybe in the head, but it makes for delightful games. I love watching Croco play. We should probably talk about Liiv Sandbox just a little bit, because the reality of Liiv Sandbox, that we had them as our middling team, but they are now 6-2 and above DRX and DAMWON Kia in the standings. They in fact beat DRX, but they also, they lost to DAMWON Kia, they lost to T1, both of those 2-0. So they've also had, has to be said, like I guess a little bit easier schedule. They haven't played Gen.G yet in the first round robin. They play them next week. We'll probably lose that one. But very respectable showing for their first round robin, especially if their only losses are to T1, Gen.G, and DAMWON, which is how it's looking like right now.
Yeah, they have back-to-back games against Gen.G, basically. They have Gen.G match and then Hanwha Life in the middle, and then they actually hit Gen.G again, like basically immediately in the second round robin. So they're going to have like this really big spike in terms of strength of schedule, which I think will actually be very good for them to have those two tough matches. And then it gets easier for them basically throughout the rest of the season. So they play Gen.G on Wednesday next week, and then they play against Hanwha on Friday, and then they play against Gen.G the following Friday. So they're basically, again, with that one buffer game, kind of going back to back into two extremely tough matches.
Yeah, and what's so fun to watch about this team is that it seems like what's really great about LCK right now is that, first off, the junglers are all like popping off in a way of all the top teams for the most part. Like jungle is probably the most interesting position in the league so far, not only because of the skill level of the players that are playing at the top level, but because every single player has like their unique picks. Like it's like, Here comes Peanut with Poppy. Oh yeah, Canyon's playing First Strike Futures Market Treasure Hunter Talia for some reason, because he
And
wants to
11 other
snowball really hard.
champions.
Yeah, and 11 other champions. So that, I mean, who knows? He's got a champion Ocean. Play anything. Turns out even Graves, Kiana, Nocturne, first Belveth pick. And then like you have Liiv Sandbox, which is like will run Vi. They're just doing that, sometimes I thought it was just with Ari, but now it's not just with Ari. Now they'll just run it no matter what, which I think is really fun. So like Krakos Vi is becoming a thing. Pioshik also has had a few Kindred games, but he's also like on the Poppy train a little bit. So there's like, and then Owner obviously is leasing out of control right now. So it's really fun to see how all of these really skilled junglers are approaching the jungle in very different ways right now and have their kind of own niches and specialties that are then now drawing target bans. And it's fun. It's really, really fun.
It has been the case on the strong side of the bracket. On the other side of the bracket, we have the blue side jungle pick Wukong and the red side jungle, also known as Viego. And we have also seen such signature picks as On Fleek's Xin Zhao. But it has not been as good or exciting on the other side. But yeah, the top teams have been very good about really having their specific jungle picks that are really exciting and fun to watch. And Krakos Vi, but also his Trundle, like that I think he's kind of popularized Trundle a little bit more in the LCK as kind of a blind pick, and now people are using it a little bit more strategically. But yeah, the jungle meta I was so worried about in the first 2 weeks of LCK because I was like, we just don't even have to say a champion names. I'm like, he got blue jungle, they got red jungle, because literally every game was Wukong on blue side and Viego on red side every game. And I was like, all right, there is no jungle meta, there's no jungle pool. But luckily, Wukong got nerfed, and it's a little bit more interesting now. Thank God.
I think I'm not sure. I don't think the Wukong nerfs actually hurt Wukong terribly much. But I think the bans are still there. But also, the jungle meta has evolved in a way where like Poppy's really annoying to play into as Wukong. So that I think helps. But also, we've seen like the jungle pool, I think, open up a little bit more too, because a lot of bans have been going into not jungle pick, basically. But yeah, if we look at Liiv Sandbox, what's funny about them is they're sort of like DRX, except all of their resources go into Prince.
Yeah,
Prince is the highest economy AD carry in the entire league right now, in the same way that Zeka is the highest economy carry from the mid lane. So Closer, I think, been playing fine, been playing standard, but so much of like Krakos' pathing has been dealing with the bot lane, getting Prince ahead. Prince is second only to Ruler in terms of KDA, which, considering that Prince has lost more games and played more games, is very impressive. So it just feels like everything kind of funnels through him at this point in time. They give him all the CS. He's feeling really happy, and he's really delivering. Prince, like for an up and coming player, he has been one of the most pleasant surprises of the summer split.
Prince is like the new Teddy. I'm calling it right now. He's going to be super popular. He's going to be famous. He's going to be a superstar player. Everyone's going to love him. Like, people already love him, but like he's going to get super popular because he has all of the makings of a scaling late game player who plays extremely well. The later the game goes, the more items he gets, the exponentially better he plays, and like how stronger he gets. Like, very similar to Teddy, even in his generic Green Wings days. But like, what's really special about Prince, and why I think he will gain international notoriety, especially if he goes to Worlds, is he's very funny. He talks a lot in interviews. He's respectful, but like he also will like trash talk a little bit. I don't know if you heard about this, but like Atlas expected Liiv Sandbox to lose.
I saw that.
So just
tell people who don't know though.
Yeah, so just to explain it, like Atlas said, like it assumed that like DRX would beat Liiv Sandbox. So his match of the week, like, just implied was, will X team, I can't remember which one it was, might have been T1, will X team break DRX's winning streak? And it was the second match of the week, assuming that they had beaten Liiv Sandbox, something like that. So Prince like won the match, and then he was like, Yeah, shout outs to Atlas, by the way, the guy who just assumed that we were going to lose in his comments in Match of the Week.
I like that he pays
And
enough attention to know that. That's too funny.
yeah. And then I see him all the time. Like I see him all the time in the studio, and he is extremely outgoing. Will try to like speak a little bit of English with us, and always says hello and greets us in English. Or like just kind of like do finger guns at you in the hallway and stuff like that. He's a really funny guy. I really enjoy running into him at Lowell Park, and I think if this guy has a chance to play in front of an international crowd and do an interview and maybe even say some words in English in front of the crowd, like this guy I think is like, so on the cusp of being an extremely famous and popular player around the world. Like I'm just this is one of my like hot takes, I guess. It's not really that hot of a take, but like it's one of my predictions, whatever you want to call it. I think this guy is about to pop off. And I think if he doesn't get a good offer next year, either from Liiv Sandbox or another LCK team, this guy's going to LCS and he's going to make a ton of money. This guy's actually about to be rich.
He'll go to LPL. He'll go to LPL. Realistically, I think, given the trajectory of up and coming Korean players. But yeah, this roster is just so hilarious to me in comparison to DRX, because like Kingen and Dove are the two lowest economy top laners, Dove even more so than Kingen, and they're all just like pick Gnar or Ornn or Sejuani players, basically. And then it's just the difference in funneling resources, where Prince is they're just like pouring it into Prince. And who could argue? I mean, his KDA's 6.5 on a team that has at least lost some series, by the way, and they give up games as well. Like they're still 12-6 overall. But yeah, they give up some games sometimes. They've already pulled off their first like upset, even though maybe that isn't an upset anymore, given the current forms of teams. But certainly demanding to be taken very seriously within this league, and it is.
Yeah,
they're really entertaining.
Can we talk about Gnar for a second before we talk about T1 Gen.G? Because it is related to the Gen.G T1 series. Gnar, I think, might secretly be the most OP champion in the world right now, in the game of League of Legends right now. He can be aggressive against tanks because of his hyper proc. So depending on where your strong side is going to be in the game, he can play weak side and be unkillable, because if he manages his Narbar well, he can just sit under a turret and be like, yeah, dive me, I dare you. And he could probably trade one back or buy enough time for the jungler to come up and defend. So he can play weak side, but if you put him up against a Sejuani or an Ornn, he can actually win that matchup too. If he's given the opportunity to play strong side based on the draft. And we're starting to see Gnar like slowly rise up in priority, even getting first picked on blue side sometimes, because I think teams have suddenly realized like, okay, he's like insanely good in team fights. He's really good in lane. He can be strong side, but he can also be weak side.
His build paths can be really different, depending on what you need. Like if you want him to build a hull breaker and split push, he can do that. If you want him to build Trinity Force Randuins, he can do that. He can build Black Cleaver. He can do a lot of different things.
Exactly. So he's just such an insanely versatile pick. And I was the biggest Gnar hater, maybe next to Atlas, for the longest time, because I was like, all right, you keep picking this Gnar, the GP is just going to crush you. And we saw a few Gnars like fail into the GP matchup or just fall super far behind and never be as useful. And you know, one of my favorite things to talk about is how, like, if you have an uncoordinated team, Gnar is the worst champion, because you have to have your Gnar bar set up for a team fight, so everyone has to be on the same page. But for the top teams right now, that's never an issue. Excuse me. It's never an issue, so I'm really, really excited to see how Gnar continues to move up or down in priority for top teams, because especially in that T1 Gen.G series, I was really feeling like, wow, you know, like, this pick is actually broken. There is no counter in this meta, because if you try to play in the past, when you wanted to counter Gnar, you'd be like, all right, I'm gonna play Aurelia and we're just gonna repeatedly gank the top side, or I'm gonna play Camille and we're gonna repeatedly gank the top side with like Twisted Fate or Gallia or something like that. In this meta, if you draft like that, then the Gnar priority wins you the draft anyways, because you're like, oh, okay, now I just play around Camille Gallia and we have like a more ranged comp and a disengaged comp, and like now you tried to counter the Gnar, but you've lost the draft. Like, just feels like a pick right now to me that is extremely difficult to punish when played well, and we have so many good Gnar players in the LCK. So the game is never about Gnar. Like he's never the carry. But the game, he melds
maybe
himself.
if Zeus is
melds
playing
himself to the game, unless it's Dudu. Okay,
maybe
like,
Zeus may have won the T1 series over Gen.G with Gnar. Let's be fair to Zeus.
Okay, let's be fair to Zeus. He didn't pick up POG for that game. I think I was like the only one who voted for him in that, which was a bit of a question mark. But anyway, in terms of like damage though, like he's not the carry. He's not going to be the one who pops off, but Gnar is so good at molding to the composition, which is why I think he's such a valuable pick. The same way in the past we've seen Gragas be so highly valued, because it's like, oh, okay, Gragas can engage, disengage, he can build a bunch of different things. Like, super versatile champion, basically doesn't lose lane to anybody. I just wanted to have this rant about Gnar, because I think it might be time for Gnar to be like banned in the first ban phase.
Yeah, I think a lot of teams right now are saving some of those bans for Seraphine has become almost a universal ban at this point in time. And then also the rest of the bans more or less have been reserved for trying to take away like very safe mid laners a lot of the time, like Azir or Corki, or they're taking away pocket picks like Ornn if you're playing against DRX. I mean, Ornn isn't really a pocket pick, but like it's just King and his infinity times Horus on champions that aren't called Ornn, so you might as well just remove it from the pool. Plus, it makes it very predictable, because then you know he's just going to like first rotation the Gnar. Or you take away the Poppy, right? Or I guess the Draven, and if you're Gen.G in that series. So there are a lot of like, it seems like the pick ban phase is pretty open at this point in time. So maybe you could sneak it in there, but I'm not sure that it's that much of a priority, considering that there are a bunch of viable top lane picks. But yeah, I agree. The versatility of Gnar does make him really good right now. Just a little reminder before we get into the good stuff of T1 versus Gen.G, head on over to esportsbet.io, predict along with us, and of course, use our referral link below to get a 50% deposit bonus up to $200 as you deposit your crypto. Now let's talk about the match.
Yeah. So is it time to talk about Gen.G versus T1? Are we gonna open the floodgates on this one?
That's right. We're gonna have our match of the week orgy right now with Gen.G versus T1. Obviously, highly anticipated. We were wrong. T1 won, frustratingly again. And I think I just have to come to terms with this, Wolf, which is that as much as I dislike that T1 can like almost throw games, I do have to give them credit in their consistency for somehow pulling out these wins or playing team compositions that are weird so well with unique win conditions, like we saw in the third game, that you would not have expected, given how some of these drafts went, for T1 to play this well. But they are so hyper aware of their win conditions at all time. And Zeus is just so good right now that he is absolutely, stomping people and showing that he is capable of hard carrying this roster. So those two things combined make T1 very dangerous. But it is frustrating because as an analyst, when you look at them, you see the flaws, and then they just clutch it out, and you're like, fuck you! You shouldn't have been able to do that. Why can you fucking do this?
Yeah.
It's so maddening.
It's infuriating. Yeah, and actually, like literally, the two games that come to mind for me the most are the Telecom War that happened super early on in the season, where KT was supposed to win that series actually, and T1 looked very bad.
Yes,
and then KT made some mistakes, and T1 randomly won, and I was like, no, this is not right. Like, and I was on the desk that day.
And T1 was another one of those instances though, where it's like they realized that what they could do was sneak that Baron with the Bard, and it's like it's only because they had the Bard that they were able to do this thing. But they realized it, then they did it, and they clutched it. And this is the fucking power of T1, guys. Like I'm done doubting it in a way, because it's been so consistent. But here's the thing that's even more fucking frustrating, Wolf, is that the power only exists in LCK. Because when they're in game 5 of MSI finals and they play like complete pansies instead of just going balls to the wall like they do in a lot of these other games, why is that? Why can't they do this against Chinese teams?
Well, I think in the case of MSI, there was an insane amount of pressure, fan pressure on them, right? I think T1 is almost ironically as the most popular esports org probably of all time across like multiple games and stuff is probably in these tense moments in front of the home crowd negatively impacted by the home crowd of the most famous team in League of Legends because everybody knows how the T1 fans are, and because I said those words, they will appear in the YouTube comments. I could see it already, but everybody knows how aggressive T1 fans could be, and that's not just like their fandom like in Korea, but also globally. Um, it puts a lot of pressure on players, and I mean, this show is not about MSI, but that Game 5 draft for T1 was not about Red Side. It was not a strong draft. It was a very weak draft.
It was a cowardly draft. Like, look at this series that T1 plays. They're down 0-1. What happens? Draven Pike, motherfucker, is like, Faker's gonna come in with Spellbook on a teleport and then steal it as he swaps to Smite. Like the final game of this series, we're just gonna play super aggressively and rely on our mechanics. These are all the things that I desperately wanted to see from them in that MSI final, was to like have the confidence in the crucial moment in themselves to make the plays. And instead we get Yuumi. Why?
Yeah.
Why?
And the thing about this too is someone might say, well, I think it's because the pressure isn't on this series because it's just a regular season game. But if they had won this series 2-0, they would have actually taken first place in the standings. And if they had lost this one, it would have been like very likely that Gen.G will actually get first place in the regular season. Like this match is extremely important for them.
And they almost lost 2-0 again.
Yeah.
The second game, if you look at the end of it and you see T1 wins in 30 minutes, you may have a false appreciation about how that happened, because if Faker doesn't steal that Baron, they are probably fucked and they lose the series 2-0.
Oh, absolutely. I completely agree with that. And it's crazy too because of the way that the draft went so poorly for Gen.G, but they still just were able to scale it out. And Doran and Ruler were like ready to do damage. Chovy was trying his best to play the game that whole time. My biggest takeaway from both of these games was that the early to mid was extremely dominant from both winning teams. Like game 1, Gen.G were like, T1, you are not playing the game at all. They T1 to T1. Like we said this on the cast because T1 was so famous for taking turrets on cross map plays and taking one kill and turning it into a 4,000 gold lead. And that is basically what Gen.G did in the first game. They were super oppressive. They played great vision control. And these are things that I think RNG played extremely well. They did even better than T1 at actually setting up picks and plays around vision control all throughout MSI. And like T1 is very good at that at their best when they're playing consistently. And now Gen.G is also showing, hey, like we can take a small advantage and then push it super hard. And then T1 also being very patient in that game and constantly setting up traps. Like game 1, it was the best game of League of Legends of the entire season for me and LCK. Because T1 were so far behind, but they have this comp that's a Swain comp, right? That has a Wukong, and they're like, okay, if we just have this crazy flank angle. It was this one time where Keria goes around all the way, wraps around the Baron pit, and tries to set up a Renata flank with Owner coming in on the Wukong, and they're almost able to catch the side laners there. It was like such a cool idea, the way they found one hole in vision to almost get a pick, and Gen.G realized it and were able to retreat, but like the way that T1 was constantly setting up traps in that first game is like playing from behind like I've never seen in a basically impossible to win game. They were still so fucking terrifying the whole time because you knew if Gen.G makes just one mistake, T1 is always prepared and has like a plan B and a plan C. Going back to those win conditions you were talking about, like T1 know like, okay, this game is lost unless we hit this one miracle moment where we play our comp exactly perfectly and win it. And the whole time I just thought like, okay, it looks like Gen.G win this game so hard that it's not even a game. However, like if they make one error, T1 is ready. It was really cool to see T1 in a losing game almost maybe possibly set up that miracle, that's the kind of stuff we have to see for LCK and international events against teams that beat them in the early game with unusual drafts that we're not used to in the LCK because LCK doesn't usually think that hard about drafting. Like that's the kind of stuff I want to see from T1 for the rest of the season, but also potentially at Worlds.
Yeah, I agree. T1 did play very well from behind, especially considering they were trying to like deny the Infernal Soul throughout this game. It was really, really tough for them to do that, especially because you're dealing with a scaling Azir and Jinx. Peanut was, by the way, if you guys want to see how to jungle Poppy, watch this game because Peanut's fucking amazing. Like, and this is why the Poppy ends up being banned for the rest of the series. Is it's just too annoying with Hex Flash. It has too much power in terms of if you get a successful gank off early, it just becomes incredibly dominant. And then I think perhaps most importantly, it's how it controls objectives. Like it basically just denies the Rift Herald in this game. Poppy's able just to use ult to pop it out of lane or, break sieges or just take objectives uncontested because you're ejecting one or two people out of these fights, like get successful ganks off for the same, like counter gank owner basically, and then just turn the tables so that you have more players involved in your lane on the counter gank. So this is really important to look at from the Poppy perspective and from Peanut's perspective to understand why he was able then to successfully draw bans on this champion for the rest of the series. But he did individually extremely well.
And he was the first player to popularize the pick really and make it strong and show that it's strong. And then other junglers in the LCK kind of emulated his playstyle. But this was just one of those ones where Peanut's like, yeah, but I'm still the OG this season. Like I'm still the Poppy player. Like you guys are all copying me, but like, can you do this? Because his decision making around that bottom side where he was able to eject those T1 players, get a pick, and then also deny Rift Herald was just.
It was great.
Like it was like if you had told somebody before who was from the future, if someone from the future came back and said like he will make this play, this is what's going to happen, the person would never believe you. Like no, he cannot do all of those things at one time against T1, the second place team of the LCK. But yeah, he did. Yeah. Poppy right now is just such an insane pick. It shuts down so many meta picks too because of the steadfast presence. It's just like, oh, I don't want to play that anymore. I don't want to play any dash champions anymore. It's not going to be strong. Not going to be good. Including, owner's best pick of Lee Sin, which is severely hurt by Poppy.
Yeah.
So
yeah, I think in general, like one of the other improvements that I think we saw from Gen.G in game one was just very good shot calling instantly. They were a player down after taking the Infernal Soul, and then Chovy basically delayed their backs while they took the other three players and took Baron, even though they had lost Doran at that fight. So they've been making some really good calls that are very aggressive in terms of both the early game pathing, which we talked about last week, but also just their late and mid game shot calling has been really tight, and so we saw that there. However, as we go into the rest of this series, because I know what's going to happen already in the comments, guys. You're going to complain that we're not giving T1 enough credit, like blah, 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 blah. The third game was T1's game, right? The second game kind of was a little bit back and forth. Faker made a positional mistake, which then allowed Gen.G to maybe get the Baron, but then he revived at the exact right time to come in with his spellbook and like steal it and then save the game.
I mean, Guma's ult from base as well was like
he both lost
sick.
and won the game for them. It was kind of weird to watch. So they did play that well, but you could see that Gen.G was really getting back into the game at that time, and the Ruler's arrows were so on point. It's a really fun game to watch, guys, for Karia's roaming on the pike and Ruler's cross map arrows into picks, and then this back and forth battle where you think T1's lost and then they suddenly win. So really fun game. But for me, it was the third game was really where T1 was shining. And to touch on what you said earlier about the Lissandra pick, because we haven't seen the Lissandra prioritized, and we saw a lot. There were Corki bans in this series in the first two games, one by Gen.G and one by T1, because it's very high priority for Chovy right now and for Faker as well. But T1 was on the red side, and they knew the Corki first pick was going to come in if they left it up. And so they counter it with the Lissandra, which then forces the Corki into cleanse.
Cleanse, yes.
And then all of a sudden, there's a conundrum because there's triple TP on the side of T1, and there's TP only on Lehen's on the Tahm Kench, which, let's be real, that doesn't help you push a side lane. So
no, it's not going to save you.
Yeah, fuck that. It's not going to help you push a side lane, which is what you need TP for in the late game. And then Doran, who I will not understand why he built Night Harvester instead of going tank this game. I disagree with that when you have mixed damage on Corki in the mid lane. But what was so brilliant about T1's play was that they basically just controlled lane pressure so well that Gen.G could never get vision. They could never get out of their lanes because they didn't have the TPs necessary. And even though Chovy tried to build Ravenous Hydra as a second item, just a wave clear, they could never do it. They were constantly playing in the T1's traps. They were constantly playing into the dark vision, the dark jungle, the dark river, and they never were able to get that pressure because the Lissandra pick forced no TP. Then they played around that brilliantly.
T1 knew that there's just no way that Chovy can ever get his package if they push the lane super hard. And they always focused on bottom lane and to some extent mid, but the focus was always bottom side because they knew that like Chovy, he's going to be so pinned down. He's their only real good source of wave clear. And so if you back and you can't teleport back in, like you can try to rush back with package because package gives you obviously a ton of speed, which is it's designed that way so you can go back and get it obviously and then return and use your Valkyrie to package damage across the fight. But like he was just never able to get value out of it. And this is just again T1 understanding their win conditions. But for me, one of the big standouts for T1 in that third game, beyond the cleanse force, which you just don't really have an option as Corki there, you will just die repeatedly otherwise.
Especially with Lee Sin. It's like the Lee Sin Lissandra combo is just brutal.
Well, T1 also literally played their favorite picks across the board outside of like Guma Keria, and like Guma Keria have played like so much Ezreal Yumi over the last year that they're very well versed on it. But Faker's Lissandra has been a pick that he and Showmaker both have really prioritized over the years and will pick it blind. When most mid laners will only be like, it's an Ahri, I'm going to pick this, or it's LeBlanc, I'm going to pick the Lissandra here. But Faker really showcased that he likes to play the champion and he wants to play. He wants his team to play around him in this series.
It was really core to T1's Worlds run last year. Was the Lissandra pick.
Yeah, and like Owner is playing his best champion. I always forget the number. I think he's like 25-2 on this champion now. He's gonna give Def's Jinx a run for its money, like eventually. And then Zeus, his debut pick was his Gnar when he first came onto the LCK scene. It was the pick he was most famous for. It was the pick that got him all his tryouts and stuff. To get him onto T1's bench basically, because he was kind of immediately pulled into the roster last year. And like I think his second best pick this season. I think his Gangplank has been his best, but still, like he's on extreme comfort here is what I'm getting at. And T1 were able to build a draft that both speaks to their players' strengths, but also is extremely strong in the meta and makes complete sense. And then they utilized it correctly. And when you see all those things coming together, it's like, wow, Faker really does have a lot of experience. Like Faker is really smart, and it goes back to those miracle wins for T1, which again, analysts hate it because we're like, well, T1 shouldn't win this game, and then they're like behind, and we're like, no, there's no way, and then they make this miracle play. But I think it's because they have 4 really young players who are still extremely talented, still extremely hungry for wins, and then Faker, who's like, I have seen everything. There is not one thing I have not seen. I know exactly what to do in every scenario. He's played like more games in his career of League of Legends than like some rookies have like played solo queue to get to be a rookie player on a team.
No, I don't know. That's not true. That's not true.
Okay.
I did look up.
But it's
but your point stands. Like even as an exaggeration, like that's definitely like a very good point in terms of his level of experience, and also he's had to figure out so many different win conditions because his champion pool has been so huge over the years, and he's always played weird picks. So he's really good on the fly about figuring these things out. I did look up Owner. He is 30-4 across all tournaments, including international competition. So he has a 88% Lee Sin win rate.
That includes international competition, which sometimes is less impressive because
sure,
but LCK isn't winning as much these days, although they're getting to the very end. I do want to see what his LCK stats are, though, really quick on the pick. If I am able to pull this one up.
Yeah, but overall he's 30-4 right now. And no,
Yeah.
I agree with you. And I think obviously having Zeus here is such an extreme boon. He's the best top laner in the league right now. It's not even particularly close.
Not even close, no.
I mean, we've seen what happens when he gets high priority picks. He seems like he can dominate a variety of matchups on both sides of the equation. Arguably, he was the best player in this series. Like, people will focus on Owner because he had some really crucial steals and like his mechanics are so good. But Zeus' Gnar was winning those games for T1. His positioning was great. His Gnars were great. Yeah, just very, very strong overall.
It's a roster that, there were some big disrespectful drafts from T1 in the first 2 weeks of LCK. I think now we can really go back and, at least for me, like I personally feel we can go back and be like, yeah, they were trying to like get over the MSI hangover and have some fun games and like dominate and get back into the excitement of playing LCK again instead of feeling burnt out and miserable, as a lot of teams do after MSI. I'm not trying to, say that I know that T1 was miserable. I don't think that's necessarily true, but you know what I mean. But like the truth is, when they started playing meta and playing around their win conditions in late game and team fighting really well and just being the T1 that we've always known and loved in the LCK in the last 2 years, when they're dominating, especially this year in spring, it's a good team. It's a very strong team. Like, I was really worried, and now I'm like, oh, maybe T1 actually wins back to back and they go on to win Worlds, like in 2015 where they had that amazing run, lost MSI, and then went on to win the whole thing. There's a lot of parallels between this year and 2015. After T1 lost MSI in 2015 as well. Like, it's very, very interesting to see the links that are being drawn at the moment.
Yeah, and I think really this series just delivered in every way we could want. We got 2 pretty one-sided games. The second game was really tightly contested. Could have gone either way for sure, but you saw amazing plays. What a great variety of picks. You saw these like crazy counter picks that were developing over the course of the series. Teams playing very well to their win conditions overall. It was really fun to watch this best of 3. You haven't seen it. I don't know why you're watching this show, frankly.
Everybody's seen it. I mean, maybe they were just like the ultimate, like, Gen.G is going to win this for sure. I believe Gen.G was unanimously predicted by literally every analyst in the LCK. Like, on the English side, we all did S4, even the non-analysts predicted Gen.G. And then the analyst desk and the Korean analysts all predicted Gen.G to win. And they did it in this like kind of trolly way when they showed it on the Korean stream, where they put up all the predictions and just put like black squares in the T1 Gen.G one. And I was so angry when they showed it on our stream. I was like, really? Are you guys really that scared of the fans? And then like slowly it like faded in and showed they all voted for Gen.G, and I was like, oh, I guess not actually. But we were all wrong. Like, we were all wrong. And that's a good thing though, I think, in this case, because it's because T1 just proved everybody wrong, and it was still a great series, and it could have gone either way. And I'm just happy that we're seeing competitive games in regular season, because it's not always been the case.
We're seeing a lot of competitive games. I mean, that's what this split is just a lot more exciting than the last one. I mean, T1's already lost. You start there, right? And they lost in a really bizarre and interesting way. I think that forced them to adapt and shore up some of their weaknesses. And then otherwise, we have a really competitive middle of the pack of teams, like with Kwangdong pulling off the upset over T1. Like, they're kind of in the thick of it right now as well.
Speaking of one-sided affairs and exciting games and maybe less exciting games, I want to talk about the situation that's happening in the bottom lane really quick over the last 2 weeks. So everybody knows that I've been casting a lot, because
so usually by the way, guys, in the Korean Fellatio Enthusiast show, we stay away from the bot stuff, but sometimes we got to get in the bot,
Sometimes
go ahead.
Sometimes we got to put the bot in.
We got to get in the bot.
We got to put the focus in the bot. So there have been so many games that I have had the displeasure of casting where they have a bottom 2v2 where one team just says, you know what, like, I will give you the insanely strong Lucian Nami lane, and then not have a plan and just lose the game in the first 5 minutes. It has happened a lot. At first we were like, no, Lucian's banned all the time. But for some reason, the latter part of last week and this week, teams have been like, yeah, I'm not so sure he's that good anymore. I think we'll just play normally into this and then just get completely obliterated. Please have a plan. And then now this week we're seeing teams go, thanks for the Nami Lucian. Guess I'll just push into turret range when there's a Poppy or Trundle or Volibear. We have no idea where he is, and he's a very strong level 2, level 3 ganker walking right for us. And then we lose the game against, like, it's like, oh, okay, Lucian Nami into a Zeri, and the Zeri gets 2 kills and pops off, and the game is over. And then as a commentator, I have 27 more minutes of commentating a game that was already decided at the 3rd minute. I think that teams really need to, our bottom teams, our weak teams really need to figure out what it means to get a Zeri, what it means to get a Lucian, and how the jungle affects whether you win or lose that lane. Because at first we as bottom teams in the LCK, we had these teams where they were like, I don't know if that's good, and now they're like, that's really good, but I feel like they don't know why.
So here's a fun stat.
I'm so
for you,
tilted.
Here's a fun stat for you about Lucian that I just looked up. He's been played 10 times so far in the league this split. He is 6-4, but one player is responsible for 3 of those losses, of the 4 losses. Which player is it?
Wait, hold on. Give me a second. Is it? I don't know. Is it Henna? No, it's not Henna. Who is it? I actually don't know. That's actually a surprising stat to me.
I think you do know.
Wait, hold on. Give me a second. I've commentated all these games. I've deleted them from my brain. I have deleted them from my brain.
I see that. You saw one of these yesterday. You saw 2 of them yesterday.
This is like really embarrassing. I don't even know. I'm cheating. I'm like trying to look up the answer right now. Who lost on Lucian yesterday? I was thinking about earlier on in the week. Yesterday I was not supposed to commentate. I had to emergency
Who played
commentate.
yesterday? Who played yesterday?
Oh my god, yeah. I see it now. I see the answer. Look, oh my god, yeah, no,
it's Ghost, guys.
The world champion Ghost, yes.
So
I mean, I spent the latter part of yesterday saying this guy isn't doing it right. This pick is not for you. Like, I spent the entire cast being like, this is not, like, I walked into that series.
It's also
I walked in that series saying they better not play around bottom side because that is absolutely not going to work. And then they're like,
because Effort is the worst player in the league. Oh, sorry. So basically, why it's funny that it's Ghost is because it may not even be Ghost's fault. It's that Effort is so terrible. There are lots of questions like, why would you play this snowballing lane that has to do very well in the laning phase when Effort is your jungler, or your support rather? And then also, why would you do it into Liiv Sandbox when you know Krako's just gonna live in your bot the entire game, like trying to set up for Prince?
Prince is the best player on the enemy team. Don't play around bottom side. You have Kana and Dread. They're the best part of your roster. Use them, please. They're really good. Like, just give Kana a strong side pick. He built his whole career off of playing Jace and shit. Like, just give him a chance to, like, actually dominate a lane, and don't play around Ghost and Effort, please.
Oh
my god, yeah. I deleted these from my brain, but I literally experienced this less than 12 hours ago.
Everyone else, the only other loss that Lucian has suffered has been Prince playing Lucian when he played it into Kog'Maw against Hanwha Life. So he did lose that
was
one.
That was a really weird
right.
game.
That was a little bit of an outlier. But the rest of them are all Ghost, and 2 of them were, in fact, in the last 24 hours. 50% of the Lucian losses were in the last 24 hours, and it looked bad. It looked bad in that lane. So, I think for the most part, when we consider that all of the other wins are like Deft, Dokdam, Teddy, Ruler, Gubayushi, these are all games that have gone very well for the top team. So it does show how well teams that aren't Nongshim can play around the Lucian pressure.
On the other hand, the other 2v2 prio lane with Kalista has not been very good for the whole league. People are still kind of trying to force that one. And I think it's a good pick. Like, I think this
you've done okay for Deft.
I think the notion that Kalista is just default bad is incorrect because the power it gives you in prio on bottom and the power it gives your jungler to actually control the blue buff on red side. Like I talk about this all the time. Like I feel like a broken record about this, but it is super strong, but only if played correctly and played in a measured way. Unless your jungler is going to just be like, all right, we're playing a 3v3 down here, and I need to protect my team and counter gank for the enemy jungler who's whole function is I hope the Kalista just doesn't kill us 2v2, so they always come down. So respect it, play around it with your jungler, be ready for the counter gank. Like there's a next step to this. It's not just a 2v2, we win that. That's why we picked it. Like that is the reason why you picked it, but you also have to play around it. Too many games decided by a Kalista or a Lucian walking too close to turret and the enemy jungler is just like, well, I win now. The game is over. That's my angry rant as someone who's
okay. So
I've cast a few extra games this week, and like a lot of them look like that. Thank you, Ghost.
I tend to agree with you, which is also why I thought it was so surprising that Gen.G was banning the Kalista in the first game of the T1 series and also in the third game. That was a little bit weird to me because like I'm not particularly afraid of Gumayusi's Kalista, if I'm being honest. But here's
and you have Peanut who's ready to punish that
yes,
lane. So
yeah, I thought that was a little bit of a weird decision by Gen.G in the draft. But if you had to guess, we're gonna continue these games. Wolf, what do you think in LCK Summer Kalista's win rate is? What do you think her win percentage?
I want to say something like 35 to 40.
You would be correct. It is 36%. She is 8 and 14 overall. And now a lot of bad teams play Kalista. It has to be said. Deft is probably the best Kalista. He's 4 and 2, I believe, overall. So it's a lot of like Samdi or Henna or these players that are losing for the most part on the Kalista. Whereas different players like Gumayusi has won. Deft is most of the wins. Prince, Teddy, some of these guys.
Yeah. I think we're gonna keep seeing Kalista in the LCK. Sorry, one of my cats decided she wants to come in, but she can't. She's not part of the Monte Wolf Show. I hope that's not coming through the mic. But anyway, I think we're gonna keep seeing Kalista. I think teams need to figure out how to play around her better. And if you're a bottom team, maybe just don't default to the bottom coin flip and be like, we will win this so hard or we will lose the game. Be like DRX. Have at least a late game insurance policy with the Zeka win condition. Like put a Corki in the mid lane.
Yeah,
play Kalista Azir. Play Kalista Corki. Okay. Play Kalista Victor. I mean, actually don't, but I mean at least something like that. All right. Don't play Kalista Ari. Don't play
Kalista into Canyons Taliyah, or don't play Kalista into DAMWON at all, because I'll play mid lane Taliyah, and even though you won't get punished in the laning phase, you're just delaying the beating until later on. Just delaying the beating until. Okay. Well, I think that should about do it for this week. Obviously, again, we are recording this before we get to see the DRX Gen.G game, which could be a huge upset, very big surprise. Probably will not be, but Gen.G also was probably heavily preparing for T1 this week. This may be a little bit of a trap game for them overall. Again, next week, some really, I think, exciting matches. DRX versus T1. That's probably the most exciting match overall. But Gen.G versus Liiv Sandbox, also, I think, kind of a sleeper match, potentially, considering those teams have been, both of them have been very fun to watch recently.
Yeah, I'm really looking forward to Gen.G Liiv Sandbox, especially after Gen.G has this really tough week with DRX and T1. DRX also had this tough week where they have Gen.G and DAMWON Kia, so there's a lot of top games happening all at once right now. So we're gonna learn a lot, I think, about our top 4 and top 5, I guess.
Yep, and we'll complete the first round robin. So thank you very much for watching, guys. We'll be back next week.